Hello, people. Tennyson, Jerry, and me back here for a Shades of Life conversation. And it's November 22nd, and it is a little over 2 weeks from the US election, and lots of unsettling things that are happening in the world. We have lots of I have lots. I won't speak for all of us. I have lots of feelings
Keep it
about
personal. There you go.
things that are going on. And some of you know that Dana Perlman and I are in a little adventure together working on something called the Inner Wisdom Lab. And we had a really lovely first series of things that we offered, and we're working on the next series of things that we're offering. And this week, when we were in a planning call, we talked a little bit about um, just how unsettled things feel. And I said, for some people waking up the day after the election, they were pretty happy about the results, but we were not them. So we're kind of dealing with a whole lot of emotions, and just trying to sort out for ourselves, like, what is the path that we want to be taking. And I said to Dana, and Jerry's heard this before, but like, I have this little bubble of anger and even rage inside of me, that if I focus too long on things that disturb me, it comes to the surface, and it's not very pretty. So one of the things that we're talking about is, well, how do we help ourselves stay grounded and present, and nurtured, I would say. And kind of, we have this sense of at least opening today's Shades of Life conversation with this sense of nurturing, and how do we nurture ourselves or create nurturing spaces for other people. And for both Dana and I, it really is around connecting more deeply with our spiritual practices, focusing on the things that are within our control, and then creating. And Dana and I are creating something, Jerry and I are creating our own thing with worldview intelligence and healthy workplace cultures. And these things feel wholesome and helpful and productive, and in service not just of ourselves, but in service of other people. And so I think, for me, part of the question now over the next few years, we're going through election season here in Nova Scotia, where I live. We will, within a year, be in a national election here. And how do we, with all the uncertainty and the not knowing of which way things are going to turn, how do we just kind of stay present? And one is, I will say, my social media read in the morning goes a heck of a lot faster than it did a few weeks ago.
Mm.
So I'll just kind of stop there. And I will say that showing up in this space for these Shades of Life conversations is something that nurtures me and inspires me, and feeds my spirit and my soul.
Mm. Go, Jerry. Go, Jerry. Go, Jerry.
Yeah. Well, when we sort of, before we started the recording, and we talked a little bit about what we were going to talk about, and Kathy mentioned nurturing spaces, two things popped for me right away, and then a bit later a third. And so the two things that popped for me, one was creating nurturing spaces for my grandchildren.
Mm.
And I have four. Two of them are older, 13 and 16, and they're busy in lives that are, teenage lives and so on. But I also have two that are 7 and 9, and so that they're very formative in many ways, and so just the notion of nurturing their own journeys and supporting it in ways, offering kindness and maybe some advice here and there, and this and that, but just creating the spaces for them to be who they are and nurture themselves, um, is something that I feel is a role of a grandparent in many ways, parents too, certainly, but my role isn't a disciplinarian so much as it is a nurturer. And so that was one that really popped for me really strongly. And then in sort of a very different way, and something that really struck me strongly is Kathy and I were teaching a couple of weeks or in October in France, and I had a class of 26 students, of which 24 were French, and of which 18 were engineers. They're all graduate students. And so we teach for 4 days, and they basically never spoke.
Mhm.
So I'm teaching and getting virtually no feedback for 4 days.
Mhm.
You know, and it's not an easy thing. You know, it's certainly cultural. So I'm it's not, you know, so I try not to take it personally, because I understand the French system is very didactic. You listen and you don't talk to the professor and you don't interact, and then add to that they're engineers. But part of the requirement of the teaching is that they do an essay about the four. So the essay is identify 5 things that really resonated with you, struck you during the 4 days, and why. You know, expand. And so I just finished grading them all those essays in the past day or two. And there were a number of them that talked about how life-changing the seminar was. The 4 days, and how, and a number of the women were saying how this had really felt empowering in their own leadership journey now. Others had reflected on how they'd seen the opposite, they'd experienced in their work life the opposite of what we taught in the class, and they're going to, when they go in the future, they're going to do what we taught in the class, and so on. And I'm like, there was something nurturing in that space, but I didn't get any feedback on it. And so, it's just struck me as you know, when Kathy asked, is like, what is nurturing space in a way? And so I had my own assumptions about it, which required some necessity of meeting my need in the teach as the professor, but that's not really true in many ways. I mean, I was really blown away by it. A couple times I just had to stop reading and think about what I just read, because it was, impactful. And then lastly, okay, fine. So what's nurturing space for me?
Okay, fine.
And I realized that probably when I really feel that need for calmness, I'm going to call it less than nurturing, is I'll play music, no surprise, but I tend to a particular kind of music in those moments, which is like somebody like Udovecchio Einaudi or Eric Satie, or maybe even a little Keith Jarrett, sort of solo piano, or maybe limited orchestration with the solo piano as dominant in a very calming, quiet way. And that for me is hugely personal, nurturing spaces to find that calmness in the piano solo kind of music. So anyway, from grandchildren to students to self in very different ways, but
Good journey.
yeah. So I'll put the wooden piece back.
The wooden piece, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Good. Well, I will pick up the wooden piece then.
Okay.
A few things that go with that. Well, I like the invitation to nurturing, and then I find myself following the recent pieces that I've been a part of to see where did I see that, or where did that fit. Before we press record, as the three of us were saying hello, I had a little mini rant going on about being busy, and everything from sort of excited about that to pissy and whiny, and wondering slash wishing my brain could work faster than it does. there is a little bit of an excitement in that, but boy, that's fatiguing to me too. Like I feel I feel tired, I think, by a version or by my capacity maybe of so many moving parts. And it feels like that's so common for everyone. You know, we are doing a lot of things and some of them very complex, some of them complicated. And I do find myself trying to revisit what matters most in all of this. So I come back to some basic things, and then when I start, let's see, what's the headline of that? It sounds trite, you know, nurturing matters, self-nurturing, nurturing spaces with others matters. And then I think back to, okay, so where do I play that in recent experience? And two things have happened recently for me. Most recently was last night, a friend of mine locally and we convened a men's group. And it was the first time. It was 90 minutes on Zoom. And it was really with a basic thing about how do we explore some version of healthy masculinity together, or the things that aren't healthy for that matter. But, you know, inviting a group of men, there were 6 of us, 7 of us, I guess, that came together, and we did the most basic of things that you would imagine. A little context, a little setup, a little check-in that included, so what brings you here? Share a story, that kind of stuff. And then we followed that. And eventually we got to the end with a little checkout that said, has there been a particular gift here for you? And by the time we got to the end, the things that maybe the biggest pattern that I saw was in this group of men, they're saying, singular, I don't normally talk to people like this. And we're just kind of circled up, you know. Yes, there was depth. I feel like I'm not the best judge anymore because I assume there's going to be depth and I assume there's going to be authenticity. And some people are really shocked by that. Like, we don't do this. I don't talk this way. But that was the appreciation. I think people wanted to feel the like the gold was, oh, connection, even if it's just temporary 90 minutes on a Zoom call. I think there's hunger for that. I think there's a big void of simple pattern that lets us do that. But then along comes people like the 3 of us and many others that say, ooh, I have a way to be able to invite some of this. The second context for me is I also recent, but I returned on Wednesday night from a week-long program in Arizona with pastors. And they are a next generation leadership initiative. So they tend to be kind of in their mid 30s in terms of age. And I get them for 5 days. Myself and a co-teacher, we share it. Get them for 5 days. It's not a thick schedule. It's kind of like 3 hours of class time in the morning and a good hour and a half for lunch and 2.5 or 3 hours in the afternoon. And as we went through the week, got to offer them some good things, but also found myself saying, "Oh gosh, you know, we're gonna not do some good things here." Okay, well, fast forward, the group, it went well in general, and by the time we get to the end of the week and do our version of a checkout from the whole week, some of the big themes were, I love the spaciousness of our schedule. And it wasn't just what my colleague and I offered, it was, you know, the overarching programming. But I think them naming, again, pastors in their version of very busy lives, wearing many hats, the thing that they were most appreciative of and craving was, oh, some structured spaciousness. Thank you for that. You know, I think that touches the issue of how do we nurture and a bit of what are we trying to nurture too. Those are a couple of the ones that show up for me in the recent world.
I think I'm intrigued by I don't normally talk to people like this.
Mhm.
Then it makes me wonder what kind of environments are people showing up to and how much of that is like in person and how much of that is virtual and how much of that is social media, how much of that is at work. Like, because I think you're right. I think there is some yearning for depth of conversation, and maybe that's a story I make up, but I think about when my family is here, whether it's like some parts of the family or if it's everyone together, or with Jerry and his family, we don't set a circle. We don't
Right.
usually have a check-in question, those kinds of things. But those conversations they can range everywhere from light music, football, whatever, to other things that touch deeper into the soul. And I think we're probably very fortunate in terms of who our families are and all of that, because we can talk about a whole range of things and be fairly aligned on most of those things. So it's so interesting to be curious about what gets in the way of conversations of more depth for some people. It's certainly the spaces that I'm showing up virtually like this or in person. It's very rare that they're contentious kinds of spaces. So I don't know. It's a curious thread. And I'm just going to throw a little side thing out here because I'm looking across the street. It's almost 3:30 here. It's dull out there, like dusk already. But my neighbors across the street have their Christmas lights on. And I read, it was before the 15th, I think, because somewhere someone said, don't be annoyed at those people who have their Christmas lights on. It brings them cheer. And they're trying to bring a little bit of light and joy to the world. And I was still at Jerry's house when I read that. And I think it was the next day you were going to turn on your lights, but it's like, just turn them on today. Just do it.
One of the things that's in the moment alive for me around this topic of nurture, I guess, in a way, cycles a bit back to some of the work we're doing on workplace culture, but I want to be more expansive about it, and that's the notion of belonging. And so I you to nurture a culture of belonging becomes as we're saying in our work, essential for a productive, healthy workplace culture. But outside of that sort of intentionality of creating it, I mean, I'll speak for Kathy a little bit. I don't think I'm being too dangerous here. Of two instances that come to mind where a culture of belonging was in some ways spontaneous. And Kathy, I think maybe I don't know if we've talked about this in Shades of Life, but last July we went to a wedding, and the only people at the wedding that Kathy knew besides me were the bride and groom. And yet her whole experience, speaking for her, was that she belonged there. That there was a spontaneity of welcome and comfort, and I belong in this wedding. And then we were just in Winnipeg, and Kathy found herself, and a bunch of us, like a dozen of us, went out to eat together. And there were only a couple people in that dozen that Kathy knew. But she found herself talking to two brothers, Matt and Mark, who were from Winnipeg, and they were Dustin's cousins. And it became it's like she belonged in that conversation with them. There was a spontaneity to it. Now they're all Canadians and they have things to talk about, but just to watch the liveliness and the warmth and the welcomeness of the conversation, I belong in this conversation. And I raise the various instances because how do we create a sense that we can be in this conversation? I belong in this conversation. It doesn't have to be so adversarial that I don't feel welcome here. And so then I have to be defensive and I have to be more assertive or whatever, because I'm not welcome here. And and I know that we can be in conversations with people that we disagree with vehemently, but what's the role of a sense of nurturing belonging in the spaces we want to be in, whether it's the workspace, the family space, a new place. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about all of that, and being myself, creating welcoming vibes or energy for the others that I'm with, that welcome energy, that belonging energy. How can I be more intentional about that, particularly with people that I don't know? Yeah. Yep. So
Kathy
So
Jordan.
yes, I just need to say something here. Um, for me, I think the word belonging in those instances that you're describing is too strong. But connecting, for sure. There was a sense of connection. And I just have to say, a lot of my political conversations are with people in the US, and their knowledge of Canadian politics is not very deep. And the conversation I was having with Matt and Mark was about Canadian politics and about across the country. And they were informed. And so it was refreshing to be able to go, oh, what about what happened in BC? Or what do you think of our premier or whatever, and not skip a beat, but know exactly what was going on. That was about connection. And aligned worldviews for sure. Anyway, Tennyson.
Well, I was just thinking as I imagine that call or that table, that you're sitting at. I imagine part of it is, these are good folks. Part of it is topic shared that you just named.
Mhm.
And then I imagine a part of it is, Kathy, you're pretty comfortable in your own skin to show up in places that aren't clearly defined or, well, geez, what is this? I know nothing about this, but I bet you have ways of just sort of being in that to ask a question or two that stirs up something pretty good. So my follow-up question to what Jerry said is just like, what made that good? You just named some of it. We had shared content or interesting alignment of content even. What do you think makes you feel comfortable, whether it's connection or belonging that way?
Um, Interesting question. I mean, you said it already, Tennyson, when you said there's some assumption that the people who are showing up are good people, like our people. And given they were all related to Dustin, Jerry's son, it's like
Mm.
that was there. Um, I would say, and you know, it doesn't happen with everybody, right? Like sometimes you just kind of get a vibe of, no, not really. Um, so I don't know, like in those circumstances that Jerry described, I would say part of it's who did the inviting to the occasion.
Mhm.
Part of it is how people showed up to the occasion, wanting to celebrate
Yeah.
connection, relationship. Um, and nobody turned up to either of those things with any ill intent.
Yeah.
Um, as we sometimes see, and an ill intent might be a bit strong, but we sometimes see this in our gatherings where people show up with their own agenda or their own needs to be seen or whatever the case may be. And I'd say those qualities weren't present.
I'm asking the question because the part of me that I think does that reasonably well or wants to do it well. I just keep looking like what
Mm,
what what is it that makes this good or alive or
yeah.
those are words to follow there. When I was with these pastors last week, um, I did an exercise with the whole group of them. There's 4 cohorts. One of the cohorts is mine and my colleague to lead, but I got to do something for the whole group also. And the way I framed it was a little bit more of what does it mean to leave a space like this and re-enter into whatever is the lives that people go back to. And I played it at the level of uh, can we deepen the kind of question that we get asked when we go back? So in other words, like a narrower question that people might get asked is, "How was your trip?" Good. It's not really inviting anything, and then we move on. And that experience of moving on feels frustrating to me, right? So I had them do just this little tiny thing about what's the question you really want to be asked when you go home. And then they named some of that, and then I gave them a little space to say, and how would you respond? So that alone, I think, points to
I
uh,
like that.
a choice of how could this be a bit more fulfilling or nourishing. And then the killer skill, though, that I was really hoping they would get is how to pivot from the reality of you're going to get whatever narrow question. Hey, how are you? Good. You too. Great. Move on. And instead, I said, I don't do role plays, but there was a little suggestion there. It's like if you get asked the question you don't want to be asked, then just say, "Oh gosh, thank you for your question. Can I tell you the question I'm really wanting to be asked?" Then you can fill it in with whatever you got, right? How were you changed as a human being by being at that event last week? What surprised you? Any of those kinds of things. So I'm trying to connect it back into nurturing, and
Mm.
I usually wish that it would just all happen naturally. And I find that there's a few pivots in there that are kind of skillful. Oh, eh, let me tell you the question that I really want to respond to. What's the question you're really thinking about? It has a way of at least experimenting with that edge. I find that to be a fulfilling thing and a nurturing thing. Do you guys play with that?
Well, I really like that, Tennyson, and I since I've known you, I think you've been doing that kind of thing and asking those kinds of questions.
Hmm.
Though sometimes I offer them out to people.
Yeah.
That question, like, what's it like to be Tennyson Wolf right now?
Mm.
Which takes you down some
Meaning, what's it
interesting.
like to be you, right? That's what you're
Right,
asking.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. What's it like to be you right now?
Mhm.
Um, and there's other ones like that, but I'm reminded of when we do the compassionate listening or reflective listening exercise that we offer. We did it with the students in France.
Yeah.
And we offer it in every art of hosting training that we do. One of the things that we say to people is you can't ask questions in the exercise because we don't want you hijacking the conversation, like hijacking the person's story, and which is different than the pivot that you're suggesting. But it is this notion of really allow a person to tell a story that's alive for them
Yeah.
to the fullest, that they are able to do that
Mm.
without taking them off in one direction or another direction. And so I think that what comes with that and with what you were saying is the power of listening and the quality of listening that we bring to it. Because if I'm tuned into a
Mm.
person and their story, I'm going to receive that differently than if I'm not. And if I'm tuned into maybe this person has a question they want me to ask them or
Huh.
that they would like to be asked so that they can tell the story that they want to tell,
Yeah.
then we can go to those places. So if it comes back to some kind of um, symbiotic relationship between telling the story and receiving the story.
Mhm. That's yummy.
And I would say that quality was present in both of these situations that um, where I didn't know anybody.
Mhm. Mm.
Um, as art hosting practitioners, we know the value of sitting in circle and the value of check-in and check-outs and how impactful they can be. And the role of the question. And one of the things I was struck by in the essays by the French students, I tracked, what were the most impactful things over the 4 days. And I think their experience with check-in and check-out was probably the thing mentioned most.
Funny.
And what was interesting about that was while they acknowledge the practical aspect of it, and we're here at this meeting, what's our purpose, or what do we hope to get, or is there anything left dangling at the end? A number of them mentioned that they felt that acknowledged as a person.
Yeah.
I mean, that just, and that questions that weren't about, that were just, what's the weather report today with your personal weather report. So they loved that question. It's not a silly question. It's acknowledging that they could say where they are today. Who am I today as a person arriving here? And that's such a nurturing act, it seems to me, that we, people that had never experienced it before, that are sitting in a room with this crazy American doing something that's completely uncomfortable for their culture, and it resonates, not just both being in circle and being acknowledged as
Yeah.
a person.
It's an out of the norm act, right?
Yeah,
And I think sometimes the response is like it's a bit of relief. You mean we can do this question? We can ask that kind of question,
exactly.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think why it resonates for so many people is because of the simplicity of it, right? Doesn't have to be complicated. Doesn't have to take a long period of time. Could be not complicated. It could take longer and have more depth. But I like what you said, Jerry, about it. People felt acknowledged. And that's pretty powerful for something as simple as a check-in process
yeah.
or a check-out process.
Which kind of gets me a bit, a pet peeve of mine in a way is, if I'm at a gathering of people and I don't really know anybody or only a few, and you you see two or three or four in a conversation, and you go over and be there, and they don't acknowledge that you really exist. And I find that frustrating. Even though, I mean, if I'm in the small group and somebody walks up, I will physically try to move to make space so they're in the circle. And I may even take a moment to say what we're talking about. Doesn't mean, for me, it doesn't mean I have to engage in that conversation, but I'd like to be acknowledged that I exist, there, and I can listen in. I feel like I'm welcome to listening to the conversation. Maybe eventually I might offer a thought. And that again to me is like the creation of nurturing spaces is just a small physical movement to open up a little bit of space so someone can stand in it and be part of the group. It's a simple thing, but I think part of the process of nurturing is acknowledging our other people, and that they're, as Kathy was used the word connection, there's something there, that's welcoming, that says join in, and I'm not necessarily obligated to say something, but if I do that act of just moving just a little bit is also the invitation to say something if somebody wants to. So I just think the process of nurturing takes many forms, and it can be very, as you were just saying, simple things. Little simple things can have significant caring, nurturing aspects to them.
I relate to this theme, and I find myself remembering back to some of the early versions of work that I got to be involved in. Excuse me. This goes back to Meg Wheatley and Myron Kellner Rogers, and they were doing self-organizing systems seminars, I think they called them. And I remember somebody being there and in a moment of aha, and I'm like admin support at this point in my life. So I'm kind of like loving the depth of it, but really on a front end of a path for me also. But somebody said, every human wants to be heard, seen, and loved.
Mm.
And I liked hearing it. Others picked that up along the way. I remember Peggy Holman having a pretty good thread in her also of hizzling, heard, seen, and loved. I that's stuck with me
Mm,
because there's always a description of the job that it seems we're supposed to do. And then there's a few things that live underneath that or live beside it. And I find as a group process person, more and more, I'm trying to say, look, I know that this is our perceived agenda and purpose and outcomes and deliverables and all of that. But let me suggest that this over here matters too. This is our job, the heard, seen, loved part. And I can, follow that in some pretty good, uh, emotional ways or emotionally intelligent ways as we restory who we are together and what matters. And then there's the part of me that just wants to translate because I love that kind of conversation, and not everybody's ready for that conversation. They're ready for the feeling of heard, seen, and loved, but not necessarily the grand, deeper meaning of it. So that's where I tie it back to what all three of us have been saying. A check in and a check out has a way of operationalizing such emotional depth. And people don't even have to get that. That group that I was with last week, without using that language per se, that's kind of what they're pointing to. And admittedly, for me, there is this insecure part of me that's saying, oh gosh, surely we need to teach them more than that. And there's good things to share, right? Which we did get to some of, but there's this part of me that thinks, oh, it's not enough. So many times I feel like if people would just get the spirit and the habit of check in and check out, because it touches a little heard, seen, and loved, oh, then we've done something potent. I keep seeing that. And I keep wanting to see that too.
well, and I just had this flash of thought about, and check-in is not just with other people, it's also check-in with ourselves, and really noticing and being aware of what our state is. And by that, I mean like everything: state of mind, state of being, state of body, state of soul, any of those things. And allowing ourselves to go through our experience or go through our emotions and live through them or feel them so that we can move ourselves to a more nurturing space.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a story under a story. It's a thing under a thing under a thing. We may not be contracted to generate a pile of heard, seen, and loved,
Mhm.
but I think we're subcontracted to do it.
Well, and then we have, I think, in this process, we give ourselves choices about what we want to engage, where we want to engage, how deeply we want to engage. And I mean that on both sides of these, or
Yeah.
maybe all sides of this equation, because it could be the conflict that we either encounter or we generate ourselves, because that happens.
Mhm.
Um, or it could be this hearing, seeing, loving piece of it.
Mhm.
But the more checked in we are with ourselves, the more we're able to decide I'm stopping short here, or I'm engaging there, or whatever the case may be. But I think so much of this
Mhm.
conflict that shows up interpersonally, we have choices about how deeply we want to engage that, or how we want to hold
Mhm.
the space for what other people are seeing and experiencing.
Mhm. Good.
It seems to me that this heard, seen, and loved is something powerful behind motivation.
Mhm. Mm.
And if we want to motivate people to do something, foundationally, they need to feel heard, seen, and loved. Now, loved could be a pretty big word here in some ways, but as I said, Monday I'm going to a dinner hosted by a friend of Kathy's and mine, a longtime friend of mine, Kathy's met him, who was a state elected official many years ago. He was a state senator and then elected to statewide office. And the other dinner guest is going to be a former state senator. So we know politics is going to be part of the conversation. The election will be less of a rehash than more of a, I'm now struck by what we've just been talking about in terms of motivation is what motivates somebody to vote.
Sure.
And yes, there are politics and policies, but if I don't feel heard and I don't feel seen and I don't feel like you care about who I am as a person, no, even if our politics are in agreement, will I go and vote for you? Will I take the time out of my day? Will I do what's necessary? And given the low voter turnout that happened for Democrats across the nation, I'm just curious of how much of this might have been in play when voting was down 8 million votes, over the Biden election. But I don't want to, I don't want to necessarily dive into a big rehash, but I am struck by this on a lot of fronts for motivation to be productive at work, motivation to volunteer in the community, motivation to do all kinds of things. What will happen if I do any of those things? Will I feel heard and seen? And do people care about me in that context? Yeah, these feel essential to a nurturing environment.
Yeah, I have a hunch / a reasonably good track record here that suggests that even in the places that don't have such an engagement pattern together, even when some of us come along and say, hey, can we just try one thing here? I want to make this part of our meeting, or as we get started. And then in the most informal of ways, invite a circle or invite some engagement, turn to your neighbor kind of stuff, and maybe hear some of that out. And when we ask a subjective question, a not right or wrong question, hey, what's one thing you're proud of in our work? That seems to lift up some of that heard and maybe some seen and maybe some loved. I think I have a hunger to connect the simplicity of procedure there to the depth of of lasting outcome or something like that. And like the criticism or the critique, the worry even might be, we don't have time for that, or we're not that kind of group. That's not how we talk. Well, sometimes we're talking about 6 minutes just to animate a little of that. I know that you know that, and I think I keep relearning that though, right?
Yeah.
Should we tuck it in, or you got some more burning there?
I'm feeling that we could tuck it in. I think I love that this conversation really has focused on nurturing in one way or another. It's like the thread has been pulled several different ways throughout the conversation, and that we've kind of boiled it down to, in a way, this acknowledging people, heard, seen, and loved, and the power of check in and check out to accomplish that as one mechanism, which, as you just said, Tennyson, doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be, simply when it's one-on-one, it can be simply looking someone in the eye and asking them how they are meaningfully, so that they know that you mean it. And then you get the real response back, not that I'm fine, life is fine, all is great. Yeah, so It's kind of, and whether that's connection or it's belonging, they're all ingredients that move to this place where I feel nurtured, I feel lifted up, I feel better leaving this conversation than when I arrived,
Mm.
whichever one that is, including today's.
That's good. My checkout is something super similar to that. I like being in company, which includes here. There are many of us, I think, that are just gaining the courage or clarity to point to what's some of the stuff that lives underneath here, that lives beyond jumping through hoops and completing agendas. And I think we have a job to do those kind of things. That's the kind of work that I'm interested in, and that bridges us back to, yeah, we got stuff we care about, we have mandates, we have jobs, all of that, but we can do that in a way that that really honors something a little bit more integrated and holistic together. I feel like that's some of the big arc of shift for people like us who come along and invite people to say, oh, there might be a little bit more here. Thanks for today. I enjoy our learning.
So I've been thinking about this nature nurture kind of connection also, and thinking about, again, I'll go back because it's alive in the past couple of days, these students, and how many of them really connected with things like the change curve and the learning curve and the chaotic path and the diamond of participation, and recognizing at moments in their past experiencing some of these things. So, and recognize this is nature, this is people being natural in where they are in the change curve or where they might be in the divergent phase or whatever. And also then recognizing, without using the word nurture, but nurturing the environment to where people can be in those spaces safely.
Yep.
And that some people are at different times on the change curve or different places, and recognizing that and treating people well wherever they are, or helping people stay divergent for a while instead of converging too soon, or being in the space of chaos and order and recognizing that that's not a bad place to be, or the grown zone. And so this understanding of nature, human behavior, if you will, and a recognition of the role of nurturing people in those spaces is, I mean, it's not language we would use, nurture, but we might hold space or whatever leadership language we like to use. But that's in many ways a bit of what we're really doing is being nurturing for people.
Beautiful.
Peace back.
Peace out.
Peace out.
You're the best at that. Thanks for today.
Yeah, thank you too. Bye for now.
Bye for now.